It says here that you are looking to identify content structures in your social studies curriculum other than just putting them or grouping them in chronological order.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I teach Georgia Studies, so I have eighth grade social studies, and the majority of our content is social studies. We have 12 history standards, but in total we have 22. So we also teach geography, economics, and government. In my school, so this is my third year teaching, and so I just kind of inherited sort of like the way that they do things at the school. And we split up and basically treat geography as its own unit, economics, and government as its own unit. And then within the history standards, each standard and its elements, which is usually three or four, is treated as its own unit. So what I've noticed is, well, even in my pacing guide, I spend 27 weeks on history and 2 weeks on geography, 3 weeks on economics, and 4 weeks on government. But looking at the milestones breakdown, um, a fifth of the test, 20% of the test is government. So as far as the amount of time that we're actually spending on that chunk of our curriculum doesn't match up. We're spending, I think, too much time on history. And I think it's just because of the way that it's structured, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot to target in for 1 year. I
Yeah, it
can
is.
imagine. Yeah. Um, okay, so as far as history, so I have I've asked around to a couple other teachers and even students and asking them how there would be other ways that you could group. I just assumed honestly that you were discussing more like on the history side, covering topics in a chronological order. Was that
Yeah.
what you were referring to?
Yes. So, yes. Within history, I think that there are ways that we can identify themes and address those concepts topically. And doing so, I think that it could almost consolidate our pacing guide to where we actually are spending adequate time on every single standard versus covering everything chronologically. It's such a wide scope that it takes so long. And so my thought was to shave down time if we readjusted the way that we taught our history standards, then we could still give enough time to everything else. So, yes, you are right. That was just kind of context for why I was asking that question, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So maybe there could be, since you're having all these different sides to your social studies curriculum, what if you could find parts that overlap, like certain parts of government when they were developed? I mean, I think it goes back to like the history of government too, right? Like all
Yep.
of these things and how it might fit into, let's say, like a Jeffersonian age, and
Yep.
these are kind of laws, and this is how our government has developed some of those. Do you guys do anything like that?
So it's funny, we're actually going over the American Revolution like right now. So next week I will start founding a new government. So it's interesting that that's what we're talking about. But yes and no. We still very much just focus on the chronological order of events. And I think it would be super beneficial if we tied those elements in, because then our students are going to see those concepts more than once. Because when we actually get to government, if we talk about the development of the Constitution, which oddly enough is really not in our standards because it's Georgia studies. Um, but if we hit on that more, I think early in the year, say October, then when we got to government in April, you would almost just be building on prereq skills versus starting something brand new weeks before they're tested over it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that would be cool. Yeah. And you can even bring in like when you start, do you guys go into like were you talking about the industrial? Are you in the industrial or what did you say before?
American Revolution.
The
So,
revolution. But if you get to the industrial age, then you could start bringing more of the economic side into that too, and
right,
how. So I think I would say, think about ways that you could find overlaps with how or when certain things came about in the government and where that fits into Georgia history or history, and bringing those connections together, like you said, I think would make it easier later on in the year when you're trying to refer back to them,
right.
as
Yeah.
opposed to reteaching everything in a different perspective. So,
Yes.
so
And I
I
think
think
it would
that's,
help kids just make those connections because
yeah.
we're moving at such a fast pace that it's hard for them to remember everything by the end of the year. So allowing them to build off of these enduring understandings, these connecting themes, I think it would certainly be beneficial. I've seen when I student taught, I was at the high school level, and I saw my mentor teacher do that. Towards the end of the year, we were like running out of time. And so she readjusted the like second half of the 20th century to fit topically. And the kids actually performed way better on that portion of the state exam than they did on the earlier stuff. So I think it's beneficial. I just haven't seen it done in Georgia studies. So that's why I was curious on how to tackle it.
Is there any specific requirements for you to go in a certain order, or is there, like, does it say I mean, I feel like as a teacher in Georgia, most schools, they do have like a mapping, but at the same time, I mean, you still have that autonomy to kind of manipulate your lessons,
Yeah.
to really target that material. So, maybe the next time you have a lesson that could tie into government, you could just like test it out.
Try it. Yeah, try it and see. I think for me right now, I'm still learning how to fit into the mold, being I'm still pretty new. Um, and so not to shake things up too much, but then at the same time, we're expected to have the same assessments and be somewhat in the same place, in case a schedule has to change for a student. Um, so it's kind of like you're fighting at it from both angles because you got to do things that everybody else is comfortable with and everybody's got to be on board, but then we get to April and it's like, okay, we've got 2 weeks and we've got 6 standards left. Like, buckle up.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. Well, there is no rule that says you can't cover multiple standards, even though you're only being assessed on, those specific as your team, you can still put extra standards in. I mean, it may not fit exactly in the county's mapping or the district's mapping, but it's not like you're not going to go back over it when everybody else is. You're just kind of like slowly bringing them in just to kind of give them a heads up. Hey, listen, in the spring when we cover this, this will be the same time period. The same things are happening, when the branches of government really start to get created. It's just, but just making small connections, I
yeah,
think that would be great, just to test it out and see how students correlate it, even in the spring. Will they remember it, or do you have to reteach it?
right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think you have a great idea. Like,
Yeah. It's the putting that idea to the, I guess, where the rubber meets the road that is the interesting part, but it's doable. I think I just am still trying to figure out how I would accomplish that, but yeah.
so what do you like, let's say next week, what's a topic in the next week that you could tie somehow into the spring, but not necessarily teach the whole standard, just kind of like bring a little bit in, like a preview?
So so I have somewhat tried this, I guess you could say. Next week we are going to start looking at the Articles of Confederation, which is basically the precursor to the Constitution. And what I've done in the past is when I introduce the Constitution, I will have students compare the Constitution to our Georgia state Constitution, because later in the year, we're going to be looking at specifically state government. That's the scope of our government standards. So I have bridged that gap a little bit. So I think that within the next couple of weeks, what I could do is really hit home. Let's find the similarities between these two documents. Let's look at the founding of our countries and where the power comes from a federal level, as opposed to what does that look like at the state level. And then, in March, hopefully, or April, when we hit it again, I'll be like, remember when we looked at what the structure was for the national government? Now see the overlap in the state government. We have the three branches of government. We have a constitution, all of the things. So it would almost be like they're seeing it twice, which I think that can never hurt.
Yeah. You could even do like some sort of mapping or diagram that you could have them put away or even hang on to, and then get it back out in the spring.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually do a Venn diagram. It's just whether or not they can keep up with that Venn for I'm sure you see that challenge as well, but yeah.
I do. Well, is there any other, sounds like you've got a good direction. I really think you should try to do what you feel like would be best for your students. And it sounds like what you got would be really beneficial for them to make those connections. So, yeah, keep your head up. I know you're new, but
yeah,
that's you know what's best for those students that you're teaching, and you know how you can use your teaching to motivate and to encourage, and sometimes bridging it and opening their eyes that would make them more motivated. So, anything else to talk about with the curriculum structures?
I don't think so. I think really what it would take is I think of those videos that we had to watch for a different course. I think it was maybe last week where he like mapped it all out on the wall. Did you watch that video? I feel like that's what I need to do to figure out where exactly I need to place things, just so that I can see it all and then be like, okay, this fits with this and this. Plus, I'm a visual person, but I feel like that makes the most sense. Just laying it out, organizing it in that way, and physically seeing where those dots could be put before moving forward. But yeah, definitely trying it out with a few things and then seeing in the spring, did it actually make a difference?
Right, right. Comparing your data to the other teacher's data. Not rubbing it in, but just comparing.
No, never.
All right. Well, great, Sarah. I think that's all the time we have. So I appreciate your time, and thanks for letting me